All right, one moment. All right. Welcome, everybody. It is so nice to see everyone today on it's not a cold winter day. I call this a balmy summer day since it's been so cold lately. But welcome to today's monthly Feed Your Mind series with No Shame on You. The program today is What is Up with the Winter Blues? Understanding Seasonal Affective Disorder. I'm Wendy Singer, Executive Director for No Shame on You. And on behalf of our Board of Directors, staff, and volunteers, welcome to today's program. No Shame on You is dedicated to eliminating stigma associated with mental health conditions so the people who need help will seek it and family and friends will know how to provide proper support and save lives. We achieve our mission through all kinds of community outreach programs, customized workshops and trainings, an online presence of over 120,000 on social media. So if you don't follow us on Facebook or LinkedIn or Instagram, please do so today. Weekly blogs, podcasts, distributions of really awesome resources and videos, educational presentations for audiences of all sizes. And we partner with organizations throughout the community and country and are known for our inclusive, consistent, and responsive programming. So without further ado, I want to introduce Dr. Sally Weinstein. She is the Associate Professor of Clinical Psychology in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Illinois, Chicago, with a specialization in pediatric mood disorders. Dr. Weinstein is the Associate Director of the University of Illinois Center on Depression and Resilience, and the co-chair of the Child and Adolescent Mood Disorders Task Force of the National Network of Depression Centers. Dr. Weinstein's research is focused on psychosocial treatment of children with bipolar disorder and suicidality. As a clinical child psychologist, Dr. Weinstein also provides treatment for children and adolescents with mood disorders and directs the psychosocial training of multidisciplinary trainees in pediatric mood disorders clinic in the pediatric mood disorders clinic. And despite all of her specialties in children, she has become the go-to about seasonal affective disorder and has been seen on many of the local news stations with talking about this important subject. So take it away. If you have questions, it'll be about a 20 to 25-minute presentation today. And if there are any questions, you can pop them in the chat to me and we'll answer them at the end. I'm Wendy at NSOU. All righty. Thank you, Dr. Weinstein. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Wendy, and it's great to see everyone today. I've been thinking that if you didn't have seasonal affective disorder before the past 2 weeks and you live in Chicago, you probably have some symptoms of it now. Even with it being a little warmer today, it is so gray and gloomy. So hopefully today will be topical, enlightening, maybe give some tips and treatment ideas too. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Give me just a moment. Okay. And Wendy, does everything look good again?
Looks great.
Okay. So we are going to get started talking about what is up with the winter blues, understanding more about seasonal affective disorder. And as Wendy said, my specialization and kind of my clinical home is in pediatric mood disorders, working with children and adolescents. But seasonal affective disorder is something that I have become really well versed in and kind of applies across the lifespan. So we won't be talking about kids today. We are going to be talking about some of the key questions about seasonal affective disorder, or SAD, including the what is this? What does this mean? The who experiences seasonal affective disorder? The why does this happen? What does the research say about the causes of seasonal affective disorder and symptoms? And how to help. And then we'll save time for your questions at the end. So we're going to start with the what. What is seasonal affective disorder? And I want to preface these slides by noting that I'm primarily focusing on the winter variant of seasonal affective disorder, although as I'll be discussing, there is a summer or summer seasonal pattern as well. So, seasonal affective disorder is more than just the winter blues. So, if we think about the winter blues, we think about feeling down, feeling lethargic and tired, and not wanting to go out when the days get shorter and the days get colder. And this likely all exists on a continuum. This is all kind of a spectrum with kind of the winter blues at the mild end, and at the farther, more severe end of the spectrum, the diagnosis of seasonal affective disorder. And seasonal affective disorder was first kind of identified, and the term was first coined by the psychiatrist Norman Rosenthal in 1984, after he noticed this pattern where so many of his patients were presenting with these depression symptoms that were only happening during a season, primarily the winter season, and this was happening year after year. And since then, decades of research have supported the existence of this disorder. And it's really classified as one of the mood disorders or a variant of mood disorders, but with depression symptoms that are specific to a season. So there's the winter pattern, which is kind of the most studied and more common, and also the less common summer pattern. So we're mainly going to be talking about that winter pattern, as I mentioned. And we really use the same criteria to diagnose seasonal affective disorder that we do for major depressive disorder. But for seasonal affective disorder, these symptoms must have a seasonal start and end. So, meaning that the symptoms improve by the end of the season, and that this occurs during the season only for at least 2 consecutive years. And research suggests that an episode of seasonal affective disorder typically lasts for an average of about 5 months, if you're thinking about kind of that winter season. And so, meaning that this is really more than the winter blues. Individuals who experience this are spending 40% of their year with these symptoms that interfere with their mood, with their functioning, their job, their relationships, which really underscores how important it is to recognize and to treat seasonal affective disorder. So that's why I said it's more than just kind of the blues. So, moving on to the what does this look like? When we're looking at the symptoms, these include changes in mood and in behavior that significantly interfere with our functioning. They get in the way of us doing what we need to do. And the mood changes may include, oops, excuse me, this is like very jumpy. Okay. Feeling sad or low most of the day, nearly every day, and also experiencing a loss of interest in activities. The term that we use for this when making the diagnosis is anhedonia. It means that we are losing joy and losing interest in things that are normally enjoyable for us. So we look for kind of those two criteria, along with some combination of other symptoms that may include hopelessness, worthlessness, guilt, irritability, frustration, or restlessness, and kind of at the most severe end, thoughts of death or dying. And in addition to that, we also see behavior changes that include some combination of feeling like really low energy or a reduction in energy and more fatigue, difficulty concentrating or remembering things, having problems with sleep. And so, with this winter variant, that usually means oversleeping. Like we're sleeping so much and still not feeling rested, still feeling fatigued the next day. Also, changes in appetite. And again, with the winter variant, this tends to mean an increased appetite and weight gain that happens during the season. And then last, some changes in our social behavior and our social functioning, usually withdrawal and isolating from friends and family. And what's important to recognize is that if we let this go unchecked or untreated, seasonal affective disorder is likely to recur over many seasons. Okay, so moving on to the who experiences seasonal affective disorder, and we're going to be talking about the prevalence, meaning how common this is, how many people this affects, and then also the risk factors. What are the factors that may increase an individual's risk for experiencing seasonal affective disorder? So starting with the prevalence, and as you'll see by the rates that I'm going to be discussing, if these symptoms are sounding familiar thus far, you are really not alone. So, what we know from research is that seasonal affective disorder affects an estimated 5% of the United States population. So, that's more than 14 million individuals. But even more than that, 10 to 20% may experience kind of that milder form of the winter blues. I also want to point out that in one large study, 90% of adults reported some form of seasonal change in mood and behavior. So this is really normative. This is kind of expected to have some change. And there's been less research on youth, but the estimates indicate that around 3 to 4% of school age children also experience winter seasonal affective disorder. And these rates might be underestimates just because we haven't done as much research as with adults. And then thinking about the factors that increase our risk for seasonal affective disorder, several have been identified. That doesn't mean that if you meet all these criteria, you for sure are going to experience seasonal affective disorder, but rather that on average, any one of these factors or some combination of these factors may increase your risk or increase your vulnerability for seasonal affective disorder. So one risk factor is age. This often onsets in young adulthood, meaning kind of that 18 to 30-year-old window. And like I said, this certainly does exist in children. So it's not exclusive to this time period, but this is kind of the most common time period for this to onset. Also, biological sex or the sex you were assigned at birth. So females assigned at birth have a 2 to 4 times higher risk of having seasonal affective disorder than males assigned at birth. This one I think is really interesting, which is living farther north. And it certainly makes sense. The further we are from the equator, the greater our risk is. So estimates of seasonal affective disorder in research range from about 1% in Florida to about 5% in New York to about 10% in Alaska. So we really see those rates rising as we're getting further from the warmth. And then having another mood disorder, major depression or bipolar disorder, or having a family history, meaning relatives with these mood disorders or other mental health conditions, increases our own risk for experiencing seasonal affective disorder. And I know I'm giving a lot of information, so keep adding your questions and comments to the chat and we'll cover them later. But let's talk a little bit about why. What causes seasonal affective disorder? Why does this happen? And there's a lot of different factors. It is not an easy answer. So there is no single known cause for seasonal affective disorder. And rather what's understood is that this is probably some combo of a lot of different factors, including environmental factors, biological factors, and psychological and behavioral factors, which we kind of lump under the term psychosocial, that all are interacting with each other and kind of under the right conditions may give rise to these symptoms. But let's talk a little bit more about what this means. So in terms of the environmental factors, this is no surprise to anyone. There's a lot of environmental changes or cues that start or change at the start of winter. The biggest one being a decrease in the hours of daylight. The days get a lot shorter. This is known as the photoperiod. So our photoperiod gets shorter. We also have a later dawn, so it stays darker later in the morning. And there's less overall luminosity. That means the brightness of the sun is much weaker during the winter season. And these environmental cues kind of interact with and may even result in this sort of cascade of changes within our biology, particularly with our biological clock and our circadian rhythms. And our biological clock and circadian rhythms are the parts of our body that are sort of like these pacemakers that regulate our mood, our sleep, and our hormones. And these are both impacted and are impacted by these environmental cues or changes, which means that we have changes in the regulation of key brain chemicals or neurotransmitters that affect our mood, our energy, and sleep-wake cycles. So you may have heard of things like serotonin, which is responsible for mood regulation, among other things, and melatonin, which is involved in sleep and mood. And these all get thrown off by all of these environmental cues. Also, there's been some research to suggest that we all kind of have different genetic variations in the way our eye responds to light. This is called retinal subsensitivity. And that means that some people experience a decreased sensitivity of the eye or the retina to light. And so that's going to be worse in winter. If you're already kind of less sensitive to light, then the less light there is, and the less you're going outside and getting that natural light because it's so cold, and the less luminosity of the sun is really going to be exacerbated by these changes. So those are all the biological factors that interact with the environmental changes, but that also interacts with our psychology. So psychologically, we tend to have, and some people may have more, negative thoughts and negative expectations about the winter that really can impact both our mood and our behavior. So if as the winter is starting, you start having the thoughts, well, I won't be able to go out, it's too cold, I'll be miserable, your mood is going to be worse because you're anticipating this, but also your behavior is going to change. You're not going to go outside if you think it's going to be so miserable. And so that can create a cycle. And behaviorally, you spend less time outdoors. We kind of do that naturally in the winter, but particularly if you have these negative expectations. So we're not outside getting that natural light and exercise, even though we still could be getting some light. Because it's colder, we're not pushing ourselves. I'm going to go for a walk, even though it's 20 degrees. There's also generally just less participation in the activities that we enjoy. When it's colder and it's dark, we are just less motivated to go out and meet friends for dinner or to go to the gym and all of these different things and changes. And so that can really lead to a cycle of low mood and low motivation to do more activities. And that cycle is called being less activated. And lower behavioral activation is a known risk factor for depression. And kind of along these lines, we also see some social changes. So if we're staying home more, that means that we're seeing our friends and our family probably less. And being less socially connected is another big risk factor for depression. So all of these factors are interacting in various ways and may give rise on the milder end to the winter blues and on the more severe end, seasonal affective disorder. So now that I have told you all of that, I think the big question is, well, how do we help with this? What can we do then? Because winter happens every year. And so what can we do to manage this? And I think first, and arguably the most important step, is really recognizing and identifying these signs of seasonal affective disorder. And you all are doing that today by being part of this talk and thinking about this. And what I mean by this is recognizing that these early signs or late signs of seasonal affective disorder are real. This isn't just being lazy. This isn't just, oh, this is who I am in the winter, I just retreat. But this is in our biology. And so it's worthy of attention like any other biological condition. And that's really key to preventing, managing, and treating seasonal affective disorder. And we can start kind of this recognition process by talking about this to friends, to our family, or to our doctors about the changes that maybe you've been noticing recently or that you've noticed in past seasons, and kind of putting that on your radar, because we know that there is a lot of good research to support that we can do things about this. We can lessen and we can manage the toll that these seasonal changes take on our well-being. So let's talk a little bit more about those ways. Okay, so I don't know if this is a word that means anything to anyone out here, but I always like to start by taking inspiration from our Nordic counterparts who have a concept in their language and in their cold country about embracing winter. And that term is, and I'm probably going to mess up the pronunciation, but friluftsliv. I asked my Nordic friend how to pronounce this. And that really kind of tackles this psychosocial piece of winter. So it translates to open air living. And the concept means embracing the outdoors, the idea that there is no bad weather, only bad or unsuitable clothing. So continue with life and embrace the outdoors, even though it's cold and dark and gray. And that's certainly not a cure-all, but I think it's a big part of kind of challenging some of our negative expectations about winter. Something else important that we can do is just being very mindful and intentional about our routines in the winter. A routine that includes all the things it might include in spring and summer: healthy sleep habits, healthy eating and drinking habits, and some form of exercise. Even if you're craving just being in your PJs on your couch by 6 p.m., we kind of want to resist that and maintain the routines that we know are healthy for us, even though they're a lot harder to do when it's cold and dark. And we really want to counteract that urge to hibernate, kind of channeling this idea of free loot sleeve, by engaging in the activities that we would typically enjoy in spring and summer. And we know from a lot of good research that there are certain types of activities that really have the biggest impact on our mood. And these are activities that are soothing. So things like listening to music or taking a long bath, activities that are active. So walking, getting exercise, kind of expending our energy, activities that make us feel successful or accomplished. So this may mean having a good day at work, but also could mean a lot of other things, like doing an art project, tackling a closet that you've been meaning to organize, or even a drawer that you've been meaning to organize, doing a baking project, doing volunteering. Things that give you a sense of accomplishment and mastery are really powerful for our mood. Activities that are distracting, like watching your favorite movie or even playing, the Wordle on your phone. Being social, being with and calling friends and family. These all have kind of the biggest bang for our buck in terms of our mood. But these are so much easier said than done. If you're experiencing these symptoms of seasonal affective disorder or the winter blues, you're probably not going to feel like doing it. Remember, one of the top criteria is that you feel less enjoyment of activities that you typically enjoy. So you're not going to want to do this. You're not going to think that it will help. But what I always say, particularly with my patients, is we're not waiting for the motivation to do these activities. We're scheduling them and acting as if we want to do it, as if the motivation is there, not waiting for the motivation. And then we're going to see if your mood improves as a result. Still really challenging to do. So, what I would suggest is starting with small, reasonable goals. Try scheduling one activity per week as an anchor, and then maybe building from there, maybe sticking there if that feels like it's enough to kind of take the edge off of those winter blues. You also want to reward your efforts. This is not easy to do. So pair doing one of these activity with a reward for yourself. If I can get myself outside, then I'm going to get myself a hot chocolate at Starbucks after I do my 20-minute walk. And you're probably not going to immediately see the benefits. Doing these activities is not like taking an Advil for a headache where you kind of immediately feel that relief. But the impact on our mood does accumulate over time. So we kind of like want to reserve judgment until after we've kind of gotten into these routines for a few weeks. And then in addition to that, I know I've kind of mentioned it, but just simply getting outside and finding something unique about winter that you might enjoy can also be pretty powerful to counteract some of these symptoms. So maybe braving the elements, like I said, with a walk, or trying out a new activity like snowshoeing or going sledding with kids or nieces and nephews or grandkids. These are all ways that we can counteract it too. And I will say, I practice what I preach. This weekend, when it was 10 degrees, I was outside with my kids sledding, and we bundled up, and I thought it was going to be pretty miserable, and we had a great time, and I felt really great for having been outside. It was pretty invigorating, actually. It was sunny, which helped, but I did really try to practice what I preach. Moving on to social connectedness. So social connectedness, I feel like, is a big buzz term that we hear a lot now. But it is something that has gotten a lot of attention as being a pretty powerful protective factor for depression. So as we talked about, we have this tendency to stay in and to hibernate in the winter, which means that we're socializing less. And we know that social support and social connectedness is a robust protective factor against depression, and that absolutely applies to seasonal affective disorder too. Also, what I think is very cool is that not only receiving social support, but providing social support to others also can positively impact our health in numerous ways beyond just our mood, but our blood pressure, our heart rate. We see so many health benefits from providing social support. So the benefits really go both ways. And so for that, I think that scheduling time with family and friends and making that a priority is pretty key. And even a brief phone call can help. If getting out of the house and meeting somebody sounds too much, phone calls and FaceTime can go a really long way too. And then I think you can also think about this as a way to sort of double up on coping efforts, which would be scheduling a walk with a friend. And then you're really kind of hitting a bunch of these areas at once. So we've talked about things that we can kind of do on our own as we're getting into the season, as we're noticing these early signs and symptoms. And those are great kind of fundamentals, but they may alone not be enough. Or it might be at this point in the winter, you're kind of far enough in that that really feels like almost undoable. And so I do want to touch on a couple other forms of treatment as well. And so several of you out there may have heard of or seen advertisements about this idea of light boxes or light therapy. So let's talk a little bit about that. Light therapy is exposure to bright light via a light box. And the thought is, and the research suggests, that this biological cascade that I talked about before, that's really triggered by environmental changes in winter. So the toll that the shorter photo period, less luminosity, later dawn, all take on our biological clocks and our circadian rhythms can be countered or even reversed by light therapy because the light acts to stimulate or revive these disrupted circadian rhythms. I heard one researcher who studies this talk about it as like it jump starts your circadian rhythms. And so a light box is very bright. It's about 20 times brighter than indoor light, or 10,000 lux of cool white light. And research has shown that exposing yourself to one of these light boxes for 30 minutes a day has been shown to improve the symptoms of seasonal affective disorder, and even with comparable effects to antidepressant medication. But a few things. First, I would absolutely recommend that you discuss this with your provider because it may not be suitable for everyone. And in fact, in individuals that are on the bipolar spectrum, or maybe don't know yet that they're on the bipolar spectrum, it can induce mania. It can be harmful for certain eye conditions, and it may interact with some medications. And so the recommendation is to use light therapy only under the supervision of a clinician who is experienced in mood disorders. And we kind of have to make that disclaimer because there are light boxes readily available commercially. This is not something that is regulated by the FDA. So it can be very easy to just say, I'm going to pick one up and start this. But we would really want to treat it like any other type of treatment or medication where you consult with a provider first. But there are some good like rules of thumbs around how we use light therapy, and your provider would tell you this, but I think the key is really to make this a consistent routine. The research has shown that the effects are kind of the best when you sit near the light box for 30 minutes upon waking, usually while doing something else, but not something that is so intense. So having your coffee, having your breakfast, or maybe again, kind of doubling up on our coping efforts, doing a soothing activity like reading or taking a bath, and that we may see the effects in a few days to a few weeks. But like I mentioned, this is not FDA approved. You can Google light boxes and find many, many different boxes that you could buy. So you want to discuss this with a provider and seek evidence-based recommendations because it does need to be that 10,000 lux to be effective. And I'm sure out there you could get something that markets itself as a light box that doesn't meet those criteria. So I put up here on the slides a couple of sources that also can give you evidence-based recommendations, a review in the literature that reviewed all available devices. And then also there are certain research clinics online, like the Yale Winter Depression Research Clinic, that also offers recommendations. Also, though, I should point out that if you don't like the idea of a light box or for some reason it's not indicated for you, that getting outside for 30 minutes of actual sunlight, I guess on those rare days when we see the sun, can provide the needed light to mimic these effects too. And then also psychotherapy. So, psychotherapy is an important topic because, as I mentioned, untreated seasonal affective disorder is going to recur. It's going to come back, maybe not every winter, but most winters. And so, for that reason, a form of therapy called cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, which is a type of talk therapy, is recommended really as the first line treatment for seasonal affective disorder. So, if CBT is not a term that's familiar to you, it's a type of therapy that really centers on trying new ways of thinking and acting to improve our mood and to change our habits that may contribute to or worsen depression. So, we talked about some of those thoughts and behaviors before that happen with the change of winter, and CBT would really target those thoughts, those negative expectations about winter, and that difficulty kind of staying behaviorally activated. And research does support CBT for seasonal affective disorder. And in fact, there's a CBT that has been specifically tailored for seasonal affective disorder that has shown superior effects to light therapy in preventing future winter depression episodes. And this type of treatment really involves learning more about your mood patterns, finding ways to cope with or challenge those negative thoughts that are related to or maybe worsened by winter, and then increasing positive activities and social connectedness and problem solving the barriers to doing so. So we kind of had a crash course in that today, and it would really expand on that. And so to find a licensed mental health provider who is experienced in CBT for mood disorders, there are multiple reputable sites that I would direct you to, like Psychology Today or the Anxiety and Depression Association of America website. We're going through your insurance provider, but I like to cross-reference with these other sources so you can see the providers that really are specialized in this type of treatment. And then finally, medication or pharmacotherapy. And what we know is that medications for depression or antidepressants have also been shown to improve the effects of seasonal affective disorder. Most of the research has focused on a class of antidepressants known as selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs. SSRIs may sound familiar to you, or the commercial names may sound more familiar, like Prozac or Lexapro, and also bupropion, which is known as Wellbutrin. And these medications may be used alone, but usually it's recommended that they're used in combination with psychotherapy or light therapy. And as we mentioned with some of these other kind of strategies, these may take several weeks to work. And also, you may have to trial a few different medications. So that's kind of all part of the process to be prepared for. And for this, I would just recommend that you speak with your primary care provider or mental health professional. Okay, so to wrap it all up before we go to your questions, some of the key messages that I hope that you would take away from today is that, first of all, seasonal affective disorder is certainly more than the winter blues. And if you experience these symptoms, you are not alone. And it's important to recognize them in yourself or your loved ones, that this is part of our biology. And so it warrants our attention, as with any other medical condition. But also to stay hopeful that there are many ways that we can manage and treat seasonal affective disorder and kind of get through these tough winters, especially in Chicago. And so with that, I'm going to pause here. I have some resources up on this slide. But then I want to also make sure that I take your questions.
Dr. Weinstein, thank you so much. You packed in a lot of incredible information. So thank you so much. We did get several questions that you actually answered as we went along, which was fabulous. There was a question about light box recommendations. Can you just use a lamp? And so you answered those pieces. There was another question about if exercise isn't working at the moment, what are some other suggestions? And I think you gave a lot of those. We did record this presentation, so I will email out a recording if you want to refer back to any of the resources that she shared. And then there were just a couple other of questions that came in that you didn't answer, and they're interesting questions. I love
Sure.
this question. Someone wrote, you mentioned in the beginning the winter version or the winter variant of seasonal affective disorder. Is there a spring version, a summer version, a fall version? And what do you know about that?
That's a great question. So, the two main versions that have been studied are the winter variant and then the spring summer variant. And the spring summer variant means starting with the kind of the onset late spring into summer and then remitting in fall. Those are the only two versions that have really been identified and studied. The summer variant is much less common and tends to be a little bit of the reverse of the winter variant, with sleeping less, maybe having more energy, eating less. So, some of the reverse of those symptoms, but also still experiencing changes in mood, kind of not feeling like yourself in a way that interferes with your functioning and your relationships with other people.
Interesting. That's fascinating. That'll be our next topic in the future. Um, and then finally, someone just asked, like, what do you think this means for people who live in the Arctic Circle? I think you answered it a little bit with the term that you shared of sort of embracing. I forget the word, so I'm not going to even try it. But embracing and being outside. But I think the question is like you hear about how in Iceland or in the Arctic it might be light for only a couple of hours of a day. Do you know anything specifically or research about those communities?
Yeah, I mean, I think that really is where this concept of free loose sleeve comes from, which is that this is so much of the year and it's so extreme that these cultures have already adapted in ways to manage it, knowing that this is very much a part of their day to day. And so the culture has really adapted to embrace this outdoor living so that winter comes with its own special, unique benefits. And I have read a lot about this just out of interest, not even from like a research or clinical standpoint, but what does this mean? And there are many open air markets sort of thinking about how our culture shifted during the height of the pandemic to accommodate all of this outdoor living because being outdoors felt safer. So many more restaurants have outdoor seating, have outdoor heaters, there are outdoor markets. This idea of there's even these terms that mean like being warm and cozy. That's something that is really prized and cherished about winter. So I think it is a complete different approach to the winter and seeing all of its positives or highlighting the positives more so than the negatives.
Awesome. And I really, some of the tips do resonate with me. I need to push myself. I have two dogs and I'm a summer person. I mentioned to Dr. Weinstein, I was a camp director for 18 years. Summer is my season. I stop
Yeah.
walking the dogs, but I think I need to get out there and put on some snow pants. I need to get some adult snow pants and get out there
Yep.
and walk them, even if it's for
Yep.
like 15 minutes. So I'm going to try. I'm going to push
Right.
myself. I'm not
Yeah.
motivated. I'm not motivated,
Nope. Nope.
but I'm gonna
You are
try.
you're acting as if you are not waiting for the motivation to be your guide, and
Yes.
you are getting the right clothing because there's no bad weather, only bad clothing. And I think we all
I
know if
think
you
it's
live in
brilliant.
Chicago, you need a good coat.
It's brilliant. And I don't have snow pants, and maybe that will push me. So thank you. Thank you so much. And I want to thank everyone for coming. Please take a moment and fill out the short survey. It will just take you 1 or 2 minutes. Helps us report back to our generous donors who make all this free programming possible, and also make sure that we're hitting the mark. And if there's something else you want to see, um, you can put that down there. In the meantime, thank you. We'll see you again soon. And I hope I see you when I'm walking the dog. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.